G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza and today we're going to be talking about animating fire. We're going to create the clip that you can see right here. We're going to create a really dynamic flame and talk about the effects and colors that make it look good, and then also how it can affect surfaces and environments around it. Now before we get started, I want to point you in the direction of a video I made previously, which is about how to create visual effects. So we use similar tips and techniques that we did in this video, but apply to a lot more things than fire. So like lightning and acid and stuff like that, but also it's not animated, it's just kind of the basic fundamentals of how to create the visual, but you can then apply the lessons that we take in this video on animation and apply it to the effects you create if you make something else like acid or something. So I've got everything ready and set up to use in this file, and you can use the techniques that we're going to go through in this video in all different animation programs. The way I've set this up in its layers is like this. The base layer is a background, which is just like a simple gradient. On top of that, I have the fire guy base picture, and the hand is 2 layers above that so that anything I draw in here will appear in his hand. On top of the hand layer is just a black frame, just to give everything a little bit of a framing, because otherwise you can see that there's uneven lines and stuff, and we want the tutorial video to look pretty as well. Now when animating fire, as with many different kinds of special effects that you animate, there are 2 main aspects that are kind of separate but both hugely important to making it look good. The first is the animation itself. In animating the fire, you want the shape and you want the motion and you want the flow to look organic. The second thing is the effect. So you really want to make sure that the lighting and the color is right. And then another thing that's a part of that a lot of early beginning animators don't often consider is things like how that affects the environment around them. So for example, if there is a flame in this guy's hand, there's going to be a reflection and light affecting his skin tone, and then in his eyes, which are glossy, then even the background itself might have some movement. So we're going to get to that towards the very end. We're going to start off with the first thing we talked about, which is the animation itself. So to start off, it doesn't matter what color I use yet. I really want to just get the shape and the motion right. So I'm going to start off by drawing a flame sort of shape, and I'm going to have sort of a bulbousy base like this. Size it to the size I want it and put it inside this guy's hand. So now that I've got the flame the size I want it, I'm going to select this and hit F8 to turn it into a movie clip, and I'm going to call this fire animation. Hit enter, and then I'm going to double click on that and it'll enter its own movie clip, and you see that it's got its own timeline and stage and everything like that. So one approach that you can take if you want to animate fire or other organic sort of effects things is just going into it and just making new frames and drawing next frames and trying to hope that it kind of loops well or make it match somehow. But what I like to do when I do things like this that have a very specific flow is map out the flow first. So the way I do this is I create a new layer on top or underneath, it doesn't really matter, and then I wireframe and lock the layer that I actually have the flame on. So I'm actually not going to worry about that now. I'm going to get another very loud color like this fluoro green, and I'm just going to draw a line that mimics the motion that I've established in the start of this clip. And you can see that I've drawn this little ball at the bottom here, which is basically where the origin of this fire is in this case. I'll stretch it down a bit so it's a little lower, and you can see that we've got this wave. What I'm going to do now is hide the layer behind it, and I'm going to start animating the flame waving from this origin point. So to demonstrate what I'm talking about, I'm going to hit F7. This creates a new keyframe up here after the previous keyframe of the green thing that I drew. So with this new keyframe selected and nothing drawn on the stage, I want to see what the previous frame was so I can draw the next frame based around that. So if you bring your mouse up to the bottom of the timeline here, you see this thing that is called the onion skin. So there's all these little buttons here. This one is the onion skin, where you get this before and after frame selection thing appearing on your main timeline area. So I'm just going to show one frame before, and you can see that I can now, with this, draw the next frame seeing the previous frame as an influence. So when drawing a wave that's moving forward or emitting up like this, I just want to make sure that they end up in that sort of position, that the wave follows a little in front of the previous one. So that's just something that you can do to approach it like that. And then exactly the same thing, I'm going to hit F7, draw my base area, and then kind of roughly map out where these curve edges pop out. Now I scroll back and forth between frames with the keyboard shortcut, which if you look at your keyboard, you'll see that the comma and full stop buttons on your keyboard have the less than and greater than arrows. So that's something easy to remember because those two arrows are like a back and forward arrow thing. So you can use those to go back and forth between frames. So hitting F7 every time, creating a new keyframe, and pushing that wave line up. Now, rather than just continuing to progress this wavy line eternally, I'm going to go back to my first frame, select the frame of this green line, and I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut to copy the entire frame exactly as it is, and then paste it somewhere else. So you notice if I use my regular keyboard shortcut, which is Control-C, and then hit Control-V, it just pastes what I've selected. But if I select the actual frame here and hit Control-Alt-C, it copies the whole frame exactly as it's all laid out. And I'm going to move over here to frame 7 and hit Control-Alt-V. And you'll notice that has pasted the very first keyframe in the exact same position at the end of the animated clip. Now this is useful because, as you can see, it gives us a reference between the way we've animated the wave so far and where we need to end up. So I know that I should at least have another frame between these two, and I'm going to extend my onion skin to show the very last frame and then the most recent frame I drew. So I'm going to draw my base again, and you can see that I can see the frame before and after, and I'm just going to draw a line exactly in between both of those. So as you can see, when I pasted that first frame forward, the lower frame didn't move forward with it. That doesn't really matter, just ignore it for now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add frames in between all of these, because if I hit enter and play, it loops, but it's also very fast and you can barely see the motion. So I'm going to hit F5 when I have my selector and the timeline on the first frame. And then I'm going to hit the keyboard shortcut for the next frame, hit F5 again, keyboard shortcut for the next frame, F5. And you can actually do this really fast if you want to. Now what that has done is it's extended the duration of each of these keyframes onto doubles, meaning they take up 2 frame spaces. That might seem a little redundant or useless or just make the frame animation laggy, but that's okay because what we're actually going to do now is hit F7 on every second keyframe. And what that does is it makes a new blank keyframe between all of these things, so that now when we select it with our onion skin selected, we can just fill in this gap with a new line. So this is called in-betweening, and that's where we really fill out the motion and make it really smooth by extending it out and filling in the middle bits. So now that I've done all of the in-between keyframes, you can see that it's doubled the length of the initial animation I did. If I hit play, you can see that it's a lot smoother looking and it looks like we've got this wavy line going up, and that's the organic sort of feel I'm looking for and a bit of consistency. Now, if you want to preview what you've animated on a continual loop, there's a button up here right next to the onion skin button and it says loop. So if you click on that and then just make sure that the area of the loop section covers that whole segment and then hit enter, you can see that we have the animation looping. Now, one of the things that I need to fix is that the very last frame is exactly the same as the very first frame. And that just means it's going to go for double the length of all the other frames. So I'm actually going to get rid of that by selecting that and right clicking and hitting remove frames. So it just kind of removes it as if it never existed. And then I'm going to extend the bottom layer to the length of 10 frames just because I'm a bit obsessive compulsive like that. Now, as you can see, the motion is a little too fast and rapid and a little too harsh at the moment. So I'm going to smooth that out, but I'm not actually going to animate every middle frame again. I'm just going to double the length of all the frames. So it doesn't need to be completely smooth. I just want it to be a little more longer lasting and a bit softer in its motion. So if I put my loop back on, hit enter and play that through, that's actually the kind of organic feel I want my fire to have. This is probably going to seem pretty weird because we've spent 10 minutes just doing this line. But this makes the whole process much simpler now because I can lock this and wireframe it because I only need it as a reference. And now I can make my first picture visible. And using this as a visual base, I can now go to draw the next frame by hitting F7 on frame 3, which is where the next reference line is. and bringing my onion skin back just to make sure that I have that reference to follow. And I'm going to follow the curve. So the fire is pushed up a bit here and we're starting to map out the motion of the flame a bit better. Now, something that you really need to keep in mind with animating fire is that the motion is always up. So however you animate it, especially if it's in this sort of context, the flames are always going to move up. That can be a bit tricky because what happens to these 3 licks here? Do they just keep going up? Does the fire get bigger and bigger? The answer to that is they are going to break off, and we're also going to create new ones. So I'll show you how that works. I'll make a new frame for the next area here, and I'm just going to make a real influx of size on the tip of the flame like that. Now I know that looks a little bit weird. It's like this weird tumor-y one. And you'll notice here, I've got the flame dipping in a bit because I'm going to add a little lump here. So I'm kind of planning ahead because this is going to turn into a new spike thing, and this thing is going to break off and go back down. So everything keeps going up. I'll fill that in, and you can kind of, again, rock between your flames here. And you can already see that we're starting to have a bit of an organic motion. So when I go to draw my next frame, hit F7, what I'm going to do is separate this from the area that it was in, and this spike here is going to immediately go straight down, and then this one is going to take over as the big daddy. Meanwhile, we have this little growing spike of fire down there, and this one is already kind of breaking off, so we might as well work with that. So animating fire and effects like this is a pretty organic process, but we just need to keep a few things in mind. One of them, which is the first thing we talked about, is making the motion really organic. The second thing is that fire constantly goes up, and then whatever you're animating, there will be rules that affect its physical properties that you're trying to draw and demonstrate. So now that I've finished going along and animating the whole thing following that direction line, I'll recap by just mentioning a few things that I kind of mucked up on and quickly fixed up towards the end. One is that I actually, without knowing it, had the size get smaller as I went because pieces were breaking off and I was adding more, but I actually wasn't keeping track of making sure that it was similar size relative to the start of the flame. So that's actually something to keep in mind, and it's fairly easy to adjust with something like this. You just kind of, as you might have seen, resize the frames until they're about the same size as the first one. The second thing that I fixed up is I actually started to forget to follow this reference line of mine. So I went back and removed some of the bits that were a bit out of whack with it. And in general, the motion of the fire is following that reference line. The next thing I'm going to do is add in between frames to all of these fire frames. So I can now hide my reference wavy line, and using just this layer, I'm going to hit F7 and make sure I have my onion skin turned on so I can see the frames before and after. Now, as you can see, this looks a little bit messy to follow. So there's another option that you can use, which is this one here, which is outline onion skin. So it's a different mode of it. And as you can see, it's a much clearer sort of template to follow rather than having very loud red colors in the normal onion skin. So with my outline onion skin turned on, I can use my pen to just draw right in between these two outlines. Then I can fill it in and then move along to the next frame 2 frames later and do exactly the same thing. And then I'll do that for every single frame in the rest of this fire animation. So ladies and gentlemen, as easy as that, if you consider that easy, we can hit the repeat button, hit enter, and watch our flame animation in action. And look, I'm pretty happy with the motion that we've established here. So using this as the foundation, we're going to go back to the 2 things that we first talked about as the most important things to keep in mind. The first is the motion. We've got that happening. The second is the effect that the fire has, as well as how it looks and things like that. First things first, what I like to do is change the color of this whole flame. I nearly always animate effects and things like that in a very strong color that I'm not going to end up using. That's just making the whole animation process easier, and then when I'm finished I can select the whole thing and change the color. Now, to change the color of all these frames at once rather than going one at a time or anything like that, you actually can't just select them and paint, you actually need to have this selected, which is edit multiple frames. And as you can see, it's got a selection area on the main timeline, just like the onion skin tool. So with edit multiple frames selected and with the whole timeline width selected, I'm gonna drag and select all of these frames of the fire, and I can now recolor the fire with my color palette here. So what I do is get a base color of a very, very light yellow. Now I'm going to turn off edit multiple frames, and that is the base color that I use to create my fire. Now we're going to add effects, and this is a fun part. So if I hit this back button here, I go out to the main area, the main timeline, and my task is now to make this fire dude and the area around him look dynamic and alive and really cool. So to test this as we go, if we hit Control Enter, we see a frame come up that shows the whole animation playing out like this, and we can actually see it in context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my flame symbol movie clip, hit F8, and I'm going to turn this into a new movie clip with the flame movie clip inside of it. So it's like a movie clip inception. So I'll call this flame effects, hit enter. And now when I go inside this movie clip, you can see I have a movie clip, and then inside that movie clip is all the flame stuff. This may be confusing, but it will make sense soon. Essentially, a movie clip is something that we can apply effects to and all that fun filtery stuff, and it applied to the whole thing without it doing it individually or anything like that. The other thing too is with its own timeline, we can animate the size and the motion of this flame without actually affecting our keyframe animation that we did inside this movie clip, and it's in its own area that's separate from the main timeline. So the first thing I want to do is establish the base kind of effect palette for this thing. So I'm going to pull my properties panel out just so you can see it better, and I'm going to select my flame. And down here at the very bottom of your properties panel, you have an area that says filters. In this filters area, I'm going to hit this little button in the bottom left corner, which says add filter. And I'm going to select glow. Now you can see that it's already applied the default glow, which is this 5 pixel red glow. I'm going to go into my color picker, and I'm going to find something of a very strong dark orange like this. And now I'm going to expand the glow and the strength a bit, and I'm going to actually make the glow quite large and make it nice and strong. So you can see this has already added a bit of an effect, and now we're essentially just going to start building up and stacking a whole bunch of these different filters. So I'm going to select another glow, but this one I'm going to make an internal one. So you see these little tick boxes down here. This one I'm going to select inner glow, and I'm going to select a different color, and I'll make it a bit more of a brighter orange like this. And you can see that the inner glow is starting on the outside glow. This is a bit weird. Basically, if you change the position inside the filters box, it then starts the inside of the glow on the edge of the flame instead of the effect. So that way, if I make it stronger and add the strength there, you can see that it actually starts on the edge there instead of on the flame. If I actually had it underneath layered in the filters box, you can see that it's a lot weirder. So I'm going to put it back on the flame layer. I'm going to lower the strength a bit and make it nice and blurry like this. And that's already starting to look really cool, but of course it looks very harsh. So I'm going to add a filter, blur. Now the blur is pretty straightforward. It blurs the flames, and let's make it 10 pixels blurred. And if I hit Control Enter, we can test it in context, and there we go. Already we've got a really cool looking flame effect. So if I'm just trying to do a straightforward, pretty simple flame setup, this is what I would do. But there are a few other things you can do to make it a bit fancier. For example, if I make a new frame above this and Control-Alt-C, Control-Alt-V, which you remember is the shortcut for copying and pasting the frame exactly where it is, and put it on the layer above, as you can see, we've just got the exact same flame above itself. I'm going to select the flame underneath, and I'm going to drag it and make it taller and slightly wider. And I'm just going to edit these filters a bit. I'm going to keep the glows and everything exactly the same. I'm going to make it very blurry. So let's make it 25 pixels blurry. And I'm also going to, in this color effect area, change the alpha and bring it down to about halfway. So now when I hit Control Enter and render, we can see that we've got a bit more height to the flame, but it's also not exactly blurry enough. So I'm just going to add more blur to that. Let's go 35, and let's blur the flame on top a bit. So that's something you can do to really soften your flame and add a lot of body to it, add a bit of height to it, and already we've got a really organic looking flame here. I'm really happy with how that looks. So now that I've got a flame that I'm really happy with, I'm actually going to just do my finishing touches, but I'm not going to do that on the flame itself. I'm actually going to do that on everything around the flame. So first things first, the last thing I'll do inside this movie clip of the flame itself is add a new layer, and I'm going to create a circle. And I'm going to draw a circle with a gradient inside. Now I'm going to select this, and on the very inside of the gradient, I want it to be a very, very, very light, almost white yellow, and I'll make the and I want to make the transparency or the alpha, let's say 50. Then on the outside of the gradient, I'm going to make it a very dark, strong orange, and then make the alpha 0. Okay, so this has a bit of a glow. I'm just going to make this nice and big and put it around the base. And now if I hit Control Enter, we've just got a bit of a glow area. This is just starting to build up a whole bunch of these things to make it nice and really effective. So I'm going to start adding an animation to the glow, and I'm just going to make it really simple. I'm just going to drag out this timeline to frame 10. I'm going to duplicate the first keyframe onto the last keyframe so that it always returns to the same position. And then at 2 random points in the timeline of this weird glow orb, I'm going to drag it up to be taller with the base still centered around the bottom. And then I'm going to also drag the other keyframe to be wider. And then if I select all of these, right click and hit Shape Tween and play between them, we have a glow that's getting a bit bigger and a bit smaller. We can also, in any point of these frames, change the gradients a bit. We can also change the color, make it a bit lighter in one of the frames. And that way, if we hit Enter and play, I'm going to hide the flames and show you what's happening. I've actually got this gradient effect. This glow is looping and adding a bit of motion that's outside of the flame itself. So when I hit Control Enter and render it, you can see that we've really got this dynamic flame effect happening. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm finished with the flame and with this glow inside it. I'm going to go back out to the main timeline and lock my fire layer because I'm not going to touch that anymore. All I'm going to do is add a few minor finishing touches elsewhere to the clip. So for example, if I hide everything except for the background gradient, I've actually made this background gradient a movie clip already. So I'm going to enter this movie clip and do almost exactly the same thing. Let's say over 20 frames. So extend this out and have a duplicate keyframe on the end, and then select 2 random frames throughout that stage. And then I'm just going to edit the gradient. So on this frame, I'm going to select the tool Gradient Transform, and then I'm just going to move the gradient and make it little changes here. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Gradient Transform, just move the gradient, add a little change, maybe make it a stronger orange for a part of it, and then add a Shape Tween to all of it. And then if I hit Enter, we can see that we've got this dynamic sort of flashing, fiery look in the background. So Control Enter to test it, and it just kind of adds a little bit more warmth and motion behind this character. Now back out onto the main timeline, we have Fire Guy and Fire Guy's hand, and of course the flame. I'm going to hide the flame for now because I don't really need it. And I'm even going to hide the background, and I'm really just going to focus on this guy and a few things that I can do to make it really cool. So first things first, I'm going to enter the movie clip of this guy's face. And if I hide all the layers, you can see that I've built everything up into a few layers. So his hair is on top, and then his thumb is over there. I'm going to hide the hair on top, zoom in, and I'm going to select a very strong color again, just so I can see it really clearly. And then on the layer above his skin, but under his hair, I'm going to draw an area that I think the flame light will be really hitting very directly. So quite as simple as drawing and outlining the areas that we think the light is really going to have an immediate impact on, like here, the edge of the chin, the edge of the ear, the edge of the neck here is very close to and angled at the flame. So I'll draw there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a default gradient here and paint it in. So just this is a black and white gradient, and we can kind of paint it in different directions and have it face different directions. I'm going to select this and change the gradient to have the inside as a orange and alpha 0, and then on the outside let's go a very, very light yellow with the alpha of 50. So this gives us a little bit of a light casting. I'm going to eyedrop and select this and just paint it in all of these other areas that I've drawn a really strong color. So that gives us, if I select this kind of light area that has been hit by the flame, and I'm going to add some animation to this. So let's extend everything out to 5 frames, and I'm going to make a new keyframe every single frame and just move it around a little bit in a random direction. So if I hit enter, you can see that it's just kind of moving around like that, and already if I test it with Control Enter, we have a little light motion in the face. Now it's all a little bit too rapid, so I'm going to break it up by doubling the length of all the frames with that technique we talked about before. And I'm going to select the highlights of the eyes that I've painted, and I'm just going to change the color to be a little closer to the color of the fire, which is this light yellow. And I'm going to make some motion there as well. And that way we can see that the immediate light reflecting from the fire in the eyes is moving about. We have some effect on the skin of the character, which is moving about as well. So that's just a really immediate and simple way that you can add an effect to something or a surface that's separate to the effect, but is affected by the effect. That was a really convoluted way of saying it. The very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go out to the very main timeline. I'm going to make my background appear because I need to see the contrast, because I'm going to select the hand and the head, and I'm going to add a filter to both of them. But I'm not going to add a glow or anything like that. I'm going to actually add a bevel. This will make sense in a moment. So if I hit bevel, you'll notice that we have a very light area and a very dark area all around the edges of this character. First things first, I want to make sure the colors of the bevel are right. So I'm going to select this highlight area, and I'm going to get a really, really light yellow like this. Then I'm going to do the same with the shadow, but I'm actually going to keep it sort of like a really, really dark red. So I've changed the colors. I'm now going to change the strength. So I'm going to make it nice and blurry like this, and soften the strength a bit, because we just want this to be a subtle effect, but make it a really large area that it covers. And then the last thing I'm going to do is change the angle, but they are both going to have different angles. So I'll select the head first, and here where we have the angle, I'm just going to drag it around until the light is pulled around to the side of the flame like this. Then I'm going to select the hand and do the same thing. I'm going to go down to the angle and change the angle until the light part is facing the flame. Then when I make my flame appear, you can see that the light on both of these is facing towards the flame, and then we have this effect of light sweeping across the surfaces of this character. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That is how I animate fire in Adobe Flash. I hope this video has been useful and you've learnt a few interesting new techniques that you can apply to your own animations. Once again, as always, if you want to check out the reference files, the link is in the description. Thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen, and until next time, I'll see you later. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel to see new content every week. Check out more of my stuff by clicking the annotations over there. You can get the reference files for this tutorial by clicking the link in the description, and if you want the reference files for all the tutorials I've ever made, check out the tutorial archive. If you're looking for a great place to collaborate, explore, or share your own content, head over to newgrounds.com. That's it for now, and until next time, see you later.